Let's talk, heart to heart.
Hello, good Monday to you, or whatever day it happens to be that you're watching. We're recording this on Monday. My name's Calvin Clark. Let's talk a little bit. We've been in the process of talking about spirituality and where your spirituality begins, whether it starts with you or the Creator. That's a world of difference in your worldview. And then lately we've been talking about the problem of pain, and that troubled circumstances and evil intent can really cause struggles in life, and they're inevitable. And so it's how we deal with those troubles and struggles that again makes all the difference. Last week I started talking about some benefits of trouble, and I want to talk about a second one this week. Last week we talked about how trouble can purify us, and there was a little bit of confusion about it, but I asked you to react to my statement about troubles purifying us, and there were a number of things that you had to say about it. One person gave an example of somebody with traumatic brain injury whose true inner light shined through, because as a gift, rather than looking for something for themselves, they were considering the needs of another person who was living with them and who hadn't had a new word search book since Christmas, and so they were asking for a gift of a word search book so that they could give it away rather than having candy for themselves. And that's sort of what I'm talking about, that in the midst of this individual's troubles, the way they responded by trying to provide something good for someone else was part of the purification process of themselves. Also, one of the commenters mentioned that troubles, it's sort of like a dusty path. The troubles are like rain, and they come and they clean the path for faith and understanding. And that was the way they were trying to grapple with things a little bit. They also mentioned that they'd gone through increasingly difficult troubles over the last years. They were recounting 12 of them, and how they were getting more and more difficult, and yet people and God were rising up in each one of those situations more and more, but they were getting harder. And that was just someone really pouring out their circumstance and the way they were trying to deal with trouble and the purification process there. And then one commenter said, was speculating about whether trouble really is a demonstration of whether your faith is genuine or whether it's not real. And so if it's genuine faith, that does it move you toward purity? It was more a question than a statement. Or is it possible for genuine faith to be polluted by troubles? And it's a little bit of a theological question that I'm not sure I want to spend a lot of time pushing on myself right now. I'd be glad to talk to you offline about that. But what I do think is, to the extent that we control our response, I think trouble can pollute or it can purify. And it is a bit of a choice in the circumstance. You see different people dealing with the same circumstances in very different ways. And so that's what I mean, is sometimes it can turn to pollution. Sometimes it can turn to purity. So to some degree, it's really your perspective during it and where you're looking for help. And so that's my opinion on that. The theological question is deeper and would take a lot longer, take a whole couple of shows itself maybe. Then there was some question about, is strength the same thing as purity? And I think this is where I didn't communicate very well last week. Both of the last two comments here on the screen, one person was saying that, yeah, questioning can strengthen your faith, but it can also cause you to run away from God. And so I'm not really sure about your statement, whether trouble is good or not good. And another person was saying, strength equals purity, or does it? And they were contemplating that. So I want to just take a couple of minutes to talk about the difference, what I see as the difference. I've been going through 5 benefits of trouble. And so the first of those benefits is that it purifies us. And the second one is that it strengthens us. So last week we were talking about purifies. So this week I'm talking about strengthening. I was not talking about strengthening last week. Although, obviously there's some intermingling of these concepts. But I do want to differentiate what I meant last week from what I mean this week. What I meant by purity was that it actually simplifies. It's not that it makes us stronger or better. It's that it reveals who we really are inside. It reveals the purity of our character. And we can burn away the negative things, like a bar of gold. We can take away the things that are not gold, and then just gold remains. That's different than strengthening. That's purifying. It's actually simplifying. It's getting down to the basics. So trouble reveals who you are at the very, very core, in the deepest level. And you can allow it to purify who you are, or you can allow it to complicate and pollute who you are. That's what I was trying to say last week. Not so much about strength. This week I do want to talk about strength. So I hope that's a difference that understands. So trouble can actually clean us, cleanse us from impurities. And then it can also strengthen us. So that's what we're going to look at this week, being strengthened. To do that, I want to introduce you to another friend of mine. This is a friend by the name of Robin. Robin actually passed away not too long ago, and I didn't know Robin real well, but I sure considered her a friend and very much my mentor and teacher in faith. Robin was a woman of extraordinary faith, and so that's why I put trouble strengthening her faith. One time I went to a conference where Johnny Erickson Tada was interviewing Robin, and they were just going through a number of different questions and that had been prepared, and they were everywhere from very lighthearted to Johnny asked her what she liked about the internet. And Robin's eyes lit up, and she said, this was when the internet was fairly new. She said, "Oh, the internet, it's the most wonderful place." And Johnny said, "Oh, why? Why is it such a wonderful place?" And she said, "I can go on there and I can hear any hymn that I want to hear and sing along with it." And I was thinking, of all the answers to that question of the internet, that's not the one I would have thought of. But it sort of shows you the strength of Robin's character, that for her the internet was not about all the frivolous stuff, but it was that she could go on YouTube and search for a hymn name and worship God in a hymn that she loved. In that same conversation, Johnny asked Robin what some of her greatest struggles were, and Robin talked a little bit about being teased by others and her growing up and how that was hard, and she cried a little bit about it, that people didn't always treat her well. And Robin had this saying that she would always say, and I think she knew that it was funny, so she kept repeating it, but she would say, one of my greatest struggles is that I'm very short for my height. And that makes it difficult for me to reach things on shelves or to get things up on the top of the refrigerator. And so that teaches me that I need other people to help me get things from the top shelf of the refrigerator. Robin was a small person. She was tiny and but full of love. And that's what I remember about her. In that same interview, I remember Johnny asking her about the topic of abortion and asking her what her opinion was. And it was so funny because it was a room full of mostly pastors and long attended church members, and we were all having fun with all the answers about, I'm short for my height, and how the internet's a great place for hymns, and we were all sort of having fun, and in a way being a little patronizing. At least I was. I don't want to prescribe my thoughts to everyone in the room, but it seemed to me that we were enjoying it and thinking, oh, here's a simple person, And then Johnny started asking her about the topic of abortion. And I started thinking, wow, Johnny, that is, you why would you go there? And so at one point she said, Robin, what do you think? Well, let me just tell you, Robin said, I'll tell you what I think about abortion, particularly as it comes to people who are diagnosed with Down syndrome. She said, I've visited babies in the hospital, and whether they have Down syndrome or whether they don't have Down syndrome, they're the same. When you lift them up, everyone gets quiet and everyone smiles. And there's sort of this automatic worship of God when you see new life. And it doesn't matter whether it's new life with Down syndrome or not. It's the same. It's one of the most profound answers to the question I think I've ever heard. And then Johnny pushed it further and she said, you know, there's probably some women here in the audience who've actually had abortions. What would you say to the women who've had an abortion? And Robin said, well, I guess what I'd say is, I know you can't see me very well, and I know my arms are really not very long, but I think God would spread out his arms wide before you. And remember, God's arms are much, much bigger than mine. His arms are wide, mine are small. And he would just reach around you and say, it's going to be okay. So as she talked about her struggles, we realized that this was a woman of deep faith, that God had been glorified and had found greatness in her life. I want to read you a verse that I was reminded of when I think of Robin. Actually, it's funny because her uncle is the one who told me about this verse. He also talked to me about this verse. The verse is from John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. Isn't that fantastic? But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. You see, that was the life of Robin. That was how Robin saw her own life. That she was there to prominently display God's work in her life and be a demonstration of his greatness. So in that way, struggle can bring strength of faith. God uses it in that way. I have something I'd like you to respond to this week. How has God been faithful in the past? I don't know if you know this term Ebenezer, but in 1 Samuel, there's a story of a fight between the people of Israel and the Palestinians. And the people of Israel are fighting the Palestinians, and it goes back and forth through chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. And actually, it starts with a losing process. They go in to fight them, and the Palestinians steal the Ark of the Covenant, and they take it back to their camp with them, and the Israelites are defeated in the first battle and demoralized and upset about it. And then the Palestinians get worried, and they send the Ark back because they start to get diseases and things, and they think that it's from the Ark. Everyone's sort of treating the Ark as magic, and rather than the presence of God, they're thinking it more like a talisman, a way of winning battles or losing battles, and so they sent it back. And then the Israelites prayed in the midst of things, in the midst of these difficult times when they were losing the battle. And there was a great thunderous voice of God which confused the Palestinians, and the Israelites ended up winning the war. And after they won it, they took a rock, which they called Ebenezer. And that was a rock to commemorate that God sustained them in a horrible time of trouble, when they thought things were at its worst and they were about to lose, that God's thunderous presence made the difference and won the battle. So that's the concept of an Ebenezer. So that's my question for you is so they put up an Ebenezer. We don't know where that was in Israel, but theoretically they stacked some stones on top of each other, and you could find them somewhere in Israel. So we want to do that now. I'd like to ask you to help me stack an Ebenezer, and let's just list how God has been faithful in the past. You know, we're in the middle of this coronavirus scare. There's, in many ways, the virus of fear might be worse for many of us than the virus itself turns out to be. Now, it's going to be probably troublesome for a lot of people, but for many of us, it's the fear which is actually going to be the worst part. And so this is a time of trouble when we need to exercise our faith. And one way of doing that is to remember how God has brought us through things in the past. So I'd like for you to think about that. How has God brought you through something in the past? Or what have been things that God has done to bring us through things in the past? Will you contemplate that with me? Leave your comments down below. We'd love to read each other's comments, but let's build each other up with some remembrances of how God has been faithful in the past. And we'll see you next week on Let's Talk Heart to Heart.